Right, so for as much as Keir Starmer and Labour's anti-migrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric via election campaigning and responses to global events have emboldened the far-right rioters to do what they've been doing over the last week or so across the country in a situation that has only seemed to get worse, our mainstream media have in effect been egging them on, encouraging it, both in their choice of language in their reporting and also the optics of who is being targeted, who is being interviewed and how they are being interviewed. Channel after newspaper after presenter have made absolute weapons of themselves in their coverage of the rioting. They've gone so far as to make themselves complicit at times, and given the narratives being set by the politicians, the media are also complicit with them in not reporting news, but platforming the very accounts and descriptions that are driving the far right to do what they've been doing and continue to do it.
Yeah, back to our top story, and the government will hold an emergency COBRA meeting later after more than 150 people were arrested. This following the violent disorder in the UK towns and cities over the weekend.
In Bolton, anti-immigration protesters were confronted by a group of up to 300 masked people shouting Allahu Akbar, or God is greatest.
And for around half an hour it was quite peaceful. There was a small counter-protest, the pro-British march on one side of the town hall here and the counter-protest on the other side of the town hall. It was around...
Right, so a couple of clips there from the BBC, pushing this oft-used narrative in relation to the criminals vandalising and desecrating the country, calling them anti-immigration protesters. Where the hell did they get that line from? They are not protesters, they're fascists, they're thugs, they are committing criminal damage, torching hotels, smashing up shops, burning down citizens' advice bureaus and even a police station. It's not just Stop Oil throwing orange flour over Stonehenge here. This is real, actual damage, committed by people emboldened by the language of our politicians, now being legitimised by the media. Protest is a human right. Vandalism is a crime. Why can our media not see the difference? They are chronically different, and all the BBC did there was remind us all what an absolute waste of time they are to watch, and how little worth there is in their news broadcasts. They are towing the government line, pushing the Labour narrative, which they couldn't say enough about during the general election campaign on the matter of immigration, that there are people here who shouldn't be here. And despite the fact so much of this vandalism is committed by white people who just hate people who aren't white as well, the BBC went all in saying gangs of people shouting Allahu Akbar or God is great were to blame, as if saying God is great is some kind of a crime or incitement to violence. But it's not the first time it's been done, and frankly Ofcom should, if they were worth a dime, be all over it. It was a disgusting, dishonest, harmful claim made on BBC Breakfast. The other clip though, frankly, if looking at a fascist demo makes you think, oh look, pro-British march, you have no business being a journalist. Small counter-protest versus a pro-British march, that absolute cockwaffle called it, unforgivable. And as much as the BBC were bad, they weren't alone though. The Tory Graph covered the riots with a headline shouting, far-right clash with Muslims in rioting. When the Muslims are the ones being targeted, they're not rioting. Hotels they're being housed in have been set fire to. Mosques targeted amongst other property believed to be connected to or belonging to migrants or asylum seekers or other people of colour. And this gets both sides. It wasn't even just a hate rag on the right wing doing this either. I have to pick on Navarra Media for this too, after their man Michael Walker tweeted out, I think it's a mistake for people on the right to suggest some violent far-right thugs mean we need to reappraise Britain's immigration policies. They are a tiny racist minority and shouldn't be driving national debate. I also think it's a mistake for people on the left to suggest that anyone who has ever said that Britain should have lower levels of immigration is somehow complicit in these riots. Isolating the far right goes both ways. Mistake? The mainstream has platformed these views for years. The only reason the likes of Nigel Farage are still a thing is because of the media. Walker is right that they shouldn't be driving debate, but both siding the issue by claiming the left has suggested lower levels of immigration is just nuts is literally just nuts. Who are you talking about here? Starmer? He's not left-wing. Socialists acknowledge the value of immigration. We're all having fewer children in this country. As a nation, we can't afford to have them anymore, as many people are finding, and they're choosing not to have them. Brexit has driven much of our migrant labour away, leaving chronic shortages. We need migrants. We should value migrants. This country always has needed them, and more than ever now. Yet, having been led for years by people on the right, always on the right, Because migrant bashing is a right-wing viewpoint, treating them as subhuman or less deserving or of taking out more than they put in, all lies, is all on them. There is no both sides, and I resent that viewpoint completely. LBC got in on the act too. They sent a reporter to Birmingham to cover the riots there, yet turned that story into one of attacking brown-skinned people, as this tweet from their man Fraser Knight exposed. What is happening on the streets of Britain is causing real tensions amongst communities. As a reporter, I've just been chased out of an area of East Birmingham by groups of Asian men who had come out to protect their community against a planned far-right demonstration. The security guard with me decided immediately it wasn't safe for us. It was clear we weren't welcome, but there wasn't a safe place for us to go for miles. Cars followed us, we had abuse shouted at us, and at one point a group of around 6 men ran after us down a road with what looked like a weapon. We were forced to run. The far right didn't appear to show up, but the community here was on edge, waiting and ready for them. They were all on corners of a roundabout and lining the roads that surrounded it. I'll give Novara Media some props back now, because their commissioning editor, Rivka Brown, dropped the mic with her reply to that, which is bang on. LBC journalist goes to Birmingham to cover far-right riots, emerges with a story about scary brown people. If you wanted to understand how the media has accelerated the great moving right show of which these riots are the predictable endpoint, you couldn't find a better tweet. Summed it up entirely. Channel 4's Alex Thompson referred to brown people protecting their communities from violent thugs as mobs of Asian men attacking white men. GB News, well, you can imagine they've had a great time with these riots. They repeatedly said the rioters have legitimate concerns, just stoking the divisiveness. It's like Christmas came early to them. But the worst, the very worst, my God, by a long shot, was Good Morning Britain and Ed Balls, who gave a masterclass in precisely how not to be a presenter, how not to be a journalist, and proved beyond doubt he was the singularly worst placed person to opine on matters such as this, though he had plenty of support. Picture the scene if you didn't see it. The GMB couch, with Balls squatting like a smug toad at one end, Kate Garraway at the other, and off to the side the permanent fixture of Tory mouthpiece Andrew Pearce, sat next to Blairite ex-Labour MP because GMB seemed to collect ex-Labour MPs like Panini football stickers, Ben Bradshaw. 4 white people all focusing on Zara Sultana, suspended current Labour MP for daring having voted against child poverty. What a sin. And very much a Muslim with brown skin also. Sultana committed what was seemingly the cardinal sin of describing the attacks, which had been aimed at Muslim communities, as Islamophobic. Balls couldn't handle that. Didn't like that at all. He bit back at Sultana, who wanted to call a spade on this matter by saying, "It's clearly anti-Muslim, right? Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper have both been condemning that for its racism. They've said attacks on the mosques are terrible, and so I don't know whether they used the word Islamophobia. They didn't. They certainly said racism. We all agree about that. Do you think it's important to control and manage immigration?" Total deflection, totally ignored Sultana's point, berated her for it, belittled it, minimised it, and used Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper to provide cover for that. Well, of course he would, wouldn't he? He's bloody married to Yvette Cooper. You literally have the husband of the Home Secretary interviewing a suspended Labour MP who is Muslim herself, when Balls is a former Labour MP himself, another right-winger to that vein as well, who lost his seat deservedly too, much like Jonathan Ashworth just did, whose line of questioning was such that it was intended to delegitimise Sultana's own experiences as a brown-skinned Muslim woman, perfectly demonstrating the level of racism and very much Islamophobia in this country, and that it very much isn't confined to the streets right now, but pervades our media, loyally supporting the politicians, and you don't get much more of an emphasis of how the media and political class are in lockstep with each other than a husband and wife team as the literal poster people for it. You had Bradshaw chipping in as well, who literally served on the council of the Henry Jackson Society, which is vehemently Islamophobic, so his interventions are about as welcome as those of his idol Tony Blair, and Sultana, to her credit, called him out for saying she wasn't answering questions because of his own track record and making unreasonable points. No wonder he fit in with the Henry Jackson Society, is it really? And then icing on the cake, Balls gets to interview his own wife after all of that, all of this. How the hell was he allowed to interview his own wife, Yvette Cooper? We accuse the Tories all the time of being corrupt, but that was off the charts. Any remaining credibility GMB had is out of the window after what came to pass just yesterday morning. That was a farce, a parody of journalism. The thick of it would call such a plot too far-fetched and put it in the waste paper basket. And of course, it was a complete softball interview compared to Sultana's. Government has to be held to account. That isn't happening when a husband gets to literally interview his own wife. But you know what got me most of all seeing Balls attacking Sultana in the way he did? Everything he was doing or saying emboldens the far right. Dismissing the point Zara Sultana was making emboldens the far right. And it was the far right that murdered another Labour MP in Joe Cox. And the thought I had seeing that interview was that this was the same sort of dismissive media narrative that ultimately led to her death. So much of it is rooted in today's Labour harking after the votes of the far right, the people who backed Nigel Farage and Reform UK. And given that Cox's widower Brendan has previously described Farage as Tommy Robinson in a suit, he who was egging on the rioters from his Continental sun lounger, then the boot fits, doesn't it? I want my country back, but I want it back from the far right. I want it back from the ignorant, the racist and the xenophobic. I want it back from the likes of Starmer as much as from the likes of Farage, and I definitely want it back from the likes of the Daily Fail or the Tory Graph or the Murdoch scum or the BBC or Ed Balls or GB News and all the rest of our failed mainstream media. Support independent alternative media, for God's sake. It's the only legitimate news there seems to be in this country these days. Reputation is all we have, so integrity is essential. And you can damn well be sure we aren't afraid to call Islamophobia exactly what it is, and call these knuckle-dragging halfwits and those egging them on in the fear they incite and the damage they cause exactly what they are: racist. Whether they're on the streets or on our screens or in the Houses of Parliament. Demonstrating the value of independent media further, Squawk Box, not watching Squawk Box, not reading Squawk Box, you should be reading Squawk Box. Squawk Box has today published leaked information on social media of a further almost 40 targets, mainly immigration centres and immigration lawyers, that the Fash plan on attacking tomorrow alone. So please do check out their latest article published earlier today to see if any of this is happening near you. It's far too much information for me to put into a video. Do please go to Squawk Box and read that article. Please support your community however you can in sending this hate packing, because we can't rely on our politicians and certainly not our mainstream media to convey that message. In no small part is other media coverage of other stories playing into these riots as well. The coverage by the BBC in particular, especially in relation to Israel, and a prominent Middle East journalist of many years standing has targeted the BBC coverage of late specifically, and in none too favourable terms either. Get the details of the BBC sinking to possibly an all-time low in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.